Om Sarvadharmasthapakas Sarvadharmaswarupakah Acharyanam Mahacharyo Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. Om. We are studying Sri Ramakrishna, the Great Master, as the spiritual teacher, second part, and we are in the 5th chapter, toward the end of the 5th chapter. And the contents of this chapter and the next 2 chapters is that in the end of the 4th chapter it was told that when the Guru Bhav becomes solidified, condensed, then it becomes Divya Bhav. And the difference is that before that, Thakur generally lives like us, suddenly he becomes divine. But now, he almost every time remains in as God, sometimes he comes to our level. That is the difference shown between the Guru Bhav and Divya Bhav. And for that to see and understand, we require people who have seen him as divine. Just as to see Guru Bhav, we require Rasmani and Mathur Babu and so and so. Similarly, Vaishnava Gauri and everybody. So now, to see him as God himself, we are coming to meet the devotees. And we have met several devotees up till now. Special mention was made of Fakir, how he entered Samadhi by Thakur stretching him, and all the devotees, and the chariot pulling, and the women devotees who followed Thakur, and all that we have seen. Now, Shashadhar has to come. And then, from next chapter, we'll get Gopalari. So now, para 27, the master who had a boyish nature got upright like a boy. You have to understand this. Saradan Swami has described upright like a boy. What like a boy? When some stranger comes, the boy is upright. But when some closeness comes, he will climb the shoulder of that man. So, this is the feeling when a small boy meets a stranger. So that is like fear. And because master had that Balya nature throughout his life, so he used to have that. And it will appear very, very amusing. 2 or 3 days had elapsed since the event spoken of above had taken place. That means he had gone to Balram's house and next day he had returned. After that, 2-3 days. Pandit Shashadhar was to come to see the master at the Dakshineshwar Kali temple. He had come very near north, what is that? Barakpur. So from there, Dakshineshwar is near. That afternoon, The master, who had a boyish nature, got afraid on many occasions, like a boy, whenever he heard that any famous person would come to see him. He thought that he could not even read and write. Moreover, there was no knowing when ecstasy would come upon him. And when he lost the consciousness of his body, his cloth, the only garment he had on, might drop off. Why it drops off? You understood by now? How we wear it, we tell, you tell. With the help of what it sticks to the body, tell. Knot. Many people do not put a knot, and Thakur could never put a knot. I am not putting in a knot. Friction. Friction with the body. That is the only force which keeps the cloth on. Upper garments are stitched, so they hang. But about the dhoti or lungi, whatever you wear, it is only the friction which keeps it up. Understand this? Now there is no body consciousness. Thakur's mind is not in the body. Then how friction will come? So as soon as he loses body consciousness, the cloud drops off. And that is what Thakur is telling here. That there was no knowing when ecstasy would come upon him. And when he lost the consciousness of his body, his cloth, the only garment he had on, might drop off. Only garment he had means he was not using a kaupin. And there was no upper garment. Under such circumstances, what would the newcomer think and say? What we thought, did it matter to him what the newcomer might say or think? Because we know him as God. He had himself taught many people again and again, people are nothing but worms. Nothing spiritual will be attained as long as shame, hatred and fear avoid. Two things. People are like worms, not to be treated like worms. But if they feel bad, let them feel bad in that sense. And this shame, hatred and fear avoid. Again and again I said that this hatred does not fit in properly. Despise, grina, a feeling of that thing is dirty, that feeling. In hatred there is some enmity, no enmity, aversion. And fear, avoid. Did he then hunger for name and fame? But whenever we try to test him, we find that the above mentioned attitude of his was very like that of a boy who shrank through fear and shyness. Shyness and lajja are different. That is translated there as shame. It is not shame here, shyness. Who shrank through fear and shyness from seeing a stranger. That is the main. But as soon as there grew up a little familiarity, he freely indulged in various kinds of jolly pranks with him. Small children, such as riding on his back and shoulder, pulling him by the hair and so on. But description. The master's attitude also was similar. He could not have talked with Maharaja Yatindra Mohan And the famous Krishnadas Par, in the way he did, he told the Maharaja, I will not call you Raja. Had he had the slightest desire in his mind for name and fame, and in footnote I explained, at the very outset he said to Maharaja Yatindra Mohan, but my dear sir, I cannot call you a Raja. How can I tell a lie? Raja was just upadhi to those people. Again, when speaking of himself, the Maharaja compared himself with the great king Yudhishthira. The master got much vexed and condemned that attitude of his. That story is in Kathamrita, you will find that. What he said, Grasthas have to speak lies. Even Yudhishthira spoke lie. Of course, it will take us to a very different field. And Thakur got so upset. You see only untruth in Yudhishthira. You don't see all his qualities. Like that he scolded him. No. When I read that, a very different thought comes in me. 2-3 places it has come. Let us go back. Thakur is Krishna. And he taught Arjuna. But he had always a great love and respectful attitude towards Yudhishthira. Yudhishthira was elder in age and full of virtues. And Krishna, and it is something like my Yudhishthira you are criticizing. Like that I feel. Anyway, when Krishnadas Pal argued with the master that there was no other religion except doing good to the world, he pointed out the defect of his intellect with great annoyance. তোমার মাথা ঠিক আছে কি বলছে? বুদ্ধি. Again, the master, it was sometimes seen, was afraid because he thought, that is the main thing, that the person who came to him, again means, because he was the boyish nature, so afraid of that. And the other side of it, he should not come to harm by thinking wrongly of that. Who came to him might be harmed, for it was true that it would not at all matter to the master whether the newcomer could appreciate his conduct and manners or not. But if unable to understand them, he slandered the master, he was sure to meet with evil. Knowing this, he felt afraid. Analysis completely done. That was why when Girish at one time spoke various harsh words about him, explaining beautifully, in his presence, with resentment and wounded feeling of love. Why Girish spoke harshly? Wounded feeling of love. Why he has not saved me up till now? Why I am bad up till now? Like that. And that is the resentment. The master said, look here, let him speak of me whatever he likes. Has he not abstained from speaking ill of my mother? Understood this point now? All that we are talking is proved here. Girish is abusing Thakur. And Thakur said, let him abuse me. But he should not speak any ill thing about the mother. No, he is not speaking about the mother. So, Thakur in his real nature is mother. Thakur as a man is Ramakrishna. That is very clearly shown here. Pandit Shashadhar saw the master for the second time. And that confused me. Is this not the first meeting? Thakur had gone to see Shashadhar before. That I was searching when you came. What is the answer? Is this not the first meeting? When did Thakur meet him? Anyway, we'll have to search out this one. Thakur wanted to see him, and he had come very near Thakur. And he had heard about Thakur and came. Second time, we will come to Balram's house. Anyway, there was no limit whatever to the master's fear when he heard that Sheshadhar would come to see him. देख একটু মুশকিল লাগছে হ্যাঁ in Bengali शशधर पंडितेर द्वितीय दिवस ठाकुर के दर्शन द्वितीय बार बोलছেন না द्वितीय दिवस that is that day Balram's house he came back next day. Here he said 2-3 days. A little confusing. We have to analyze it. There was no limit whatever to the master's fear when he heard that Sheshadhar would come to see him. He said to Yogen, Junior Naren, and several others, please be present then when the Pandit comes. What the master meant was this. He was an illiterate man. He might not be able to speak rightly with the Pandit. So we all should be present and speak with the Pandit and save the master himself from lapses. How difficult it is to explain to others his childlike fear. But when Sheshadhar actually arrived, the master became as it were a different person. He was in a state resembling partial normal consciousness. While one looked at him with steadfast eyes, his lips were seen slightly quivering with a smile. So he has gone into higher consciousness. He then addressed the Pandit and said affectionately, you are a Pandit, please say something. Sheshadhar, sir, my heart has dried up because of my study of philosophy. So I have come to you in order to have a little of the sap of devotion. Therefore, please say something yourself and let me listen. The master affectionately. What shall I say? No one can say what existence, knowledge, bliss, absolute is. That is why he at first became half male and half female. You know that? Ardhanari? You have seen that image? Their Shankar Stotra also is there. Why so? Because he wanted to show that both Purusha and Prakriti were he. He then came down another step from there and became the separate Purusha and the separate Prakriti. Say something. Thakur is telling about Brahman, we cannot say anything. But when he comes down, he becomes Ardhanari. And when he still comes down, he becomes Shiva and Shakti. As he spoke thus about the hidden truths of spirituality, he became excited and stood up and addressing Sheshadhar said, his spirituality was roused. So it is not exactly excitation, appears like excitation, but it is spiritual fervor. I think, uttejita hoya. I say the English excited can be the word. What else can be there? Okay. Until the mind is joined to the existence consciousness bliss, both prayer to God and worldly duties continue till we do not have actual experience. The mind is not joined. We are thinking of it. When afterward the mind merges in him, there is no necessity for attending to one's duties. Take for example, the line of the song, my Nitai is a mad elephant. With Nitai, Chaitanya is associate Nityananda and is intoxicated with the name of God. So he is like a mad elephant. Nitai Amar Mata Hathi. Sung in Kirtan. When the song commences, the words are sung with correct enunciation, tone, time, measure, tempo and rhythm. It is sung as it should be, with attention to all these things. Afterwards, as the mind merges a little in the emotion produced by the song, bhav. The words mad elephant only are sung. Matahati, Matahati. As the mind enters more deeply into the bhav, elephant only is sung. Hati, Hati. Again, when it goes deeper still, the singer, in trying to utter the word elephant, Hati, can utter only the syllable ha and remains with his mouth again. Saying this, Thakur became like that. That is the Panjit. Speaking thus, no sooner had the master uttered the syllable ha, then he became himself completely speechless and motionless and remained in that state for about 15 minutes. Bereft of consciousness, outside consciousness, with his face bright and serene. At the end of the ecstasy, he addressed Shashadhar again and spoke affectionately. From there he has seen Shashadhar and now he will speak. The master, "Oh Pandit, I have seen you through and through. That is, ascending to a higher plane of consciousness with the help of samadhi, the master saw what kind of fast impression there was in Shashadhar's mind. That is through and through. You are good. Good. After finishing cooking, etc., example, and feeding all, a housewife places her towel on the shoulder and goes to the pond to bathe and wash her clothes. Bengal custom. And does not return to the kitchen. So you also will finish telling others of him and will go, never to come back. Yes, in the future, past impressions, how it will lead him. Hearing these words of the master, Shashadhar said, "It is all through your grace," and took the dust of his feet again and again. He heard the master's words quite astonished, and his heart melted into tears, as he had thought so long that he could not realize God. So he got an assurance that you are doing work now, then you will go away. The incident as described by the master himself to a devotee. We shall now narrate the incident as described the master to a great friend of ours, when the latter came to him on the day following Shashadhar's visit to Dakshineshwar. The master affectionately, "Don't you see that there is nothing of the kind literary here? I am a man without education, etc. I was much afraid when I heard that the Pandit would come here. You see, I have no consciousness of even my cloth. Up till now, Saradananda Swamiji had described, and now he is telling the master's word. I shrank into myself for fear that I might say something which might not be proper. I said to mother, I don't know the scriptures and philosophy. I know thyself only. He knows the reality only. Mother, please protect me thyself." In Shankaracharya Stotra about Brahman, one shloka. Pranata Bhaya Vendru Brahma Yattanna Tosmi. Nirguna and all that he describes. And they said that who bow down to you, you remove their fear. That Brahman I am bowing down. Then I said to someone, be present then. Again to some other I said, I shall feel somewhat confident when I see you with me. Even when the Pandit came and sat down, fear continued. I sat silent, went on looking at him and listening to his words. Just then I saw the Pandit's inner nature. Mother showed me that the study of the scriptures, etc., was of no avail if there were no detachment and discrimination. Vivek Vairagya, detachment is called dispassion. These things were of no use. Something crept immediately afterwards toward the head, and fear vanished in no time. What crept? Kundalini. I became completely overwhelmed. The face turned upwards, and I felt a flow of words gushing out of my mouth. He is not speaking as Ramakrishna. Words are coming out. The more the words came out, the more were words pushed forward and supplied, as it were, by someone from within. He used an example for that. It was as if a man was measuring paddy in that part of the country, Kamarpukur. One person counts the measures, calling out 1, 2, and so on, while another sits behind him and pushes forward the paddy and supplies him with heaps of it. But I did not know at all what I said. Someone is speaking. That means his reality. When a little consciousness returned, what I saw was that he was weeping, Pandit. He was completely changed. So that direct vision of Thakur inside, he aroused all his sanskar. That is the change. A state like this comes now and then owing to fear. I was again and again, oh, he is hearing the previous thing. A state like this comes now and then owing to fear. I was going again and again toward the tamarisk tree. You understand? Peshab jabo, bhaiye jabo, fear. On account of urges for easing myself. It came also on that day when Keshav sent word that he would bring with him an Englishman, the missionary cook, on a tour to India, and take me in a steamer for a trip in the Ganga. When, however, they had come and I got into the steamer, I was in a state like this, and there was a ceaseless flow of words. Afterwards, they, showing us, said, you imparted much instruction, but I knew nothing, my child. No, I consciousness is the man gains faith in such stories extent about other incarnations when he sees the extraordinary behavior of the Master. In our present age, when all these are historically recorded, how can we understand such wonderful states of the wonderful Master? We are simply astounded and speechless and know not what we should say. Dwelling in his body and mind, a marvelous power sported in these unprecedented ways, brought anyone whom it liked to Dakshineshwar with a wonderful attraction and gave him strength to ascend to higher planes of spirituality, that person. One cannot understand all this though one witnesses it, but one can know from the result that these wonderful events did really happen. Beyond that, none can know anything. How many occasions did we see with our own eyes malicious men coming to the master with inimical intention, and the master touching them in a state of ecstasy. When overwhelmed with the influence of that power, they acquired a new life. With their internal nature radically changed and were blessed, Jesus gave new life to that unhappy woman, Mary, by a mere touch. That is a story. Some woman was condemned, was tied to a tree, and the mob was about to throw stones at her. When Christ appeared, and addressing the people, he said, first throw the stone if you are absolutely pure in the mind. And then they ran away. Then Jesus released her and talked kindly with her and don't do such evil things again. And she became a saint. Unhappy woman Mary, there are 2-3 Marys in Jesus' life. Mary Magdalene, his mother Mary. This is a different Mary. Sri Chaitanya in ecstasy climbed onto the shoulders of some persons, that Kaji, whereupon his heretical feelings of doubt and disbelief were destroyed and he acquired devotion to God. We had read of such events in the lives of incarnations and used to think that the fanaticism of generations of disciples conspired with the mean desire of adding to the number of their followers to give currency to such misleading lies, which had acted as a stumbling block on the path to the proper realization of truth in the spiritual world. Only extraordinary thing. It was, we found, admitted in the book called the Bhakti Chaitanya Chandrika, published by the New Dispensation, Brahma Samaj people, by influence of Thakur, that Sri Chaitanya used to lose normal consciousness at the name of Hari. And we remember how he took the author to be soft-headed. How pitiably narrow we were at that time, and how pitiable would have been our condition had we not had the good fortune to see the Master. This for the whole future humanity. Having had the blessing of meeting the Master, we are now in a position, as they say, to detect wrong thatching, though we do not know how to thatch ourselves. Thatching is the building of a hut. We do not know. But if somebody does wrongly, we can understand it is wrong. That means if there is some wrong thing in spirituality, you can discover. We may not have gone spiritually. But seeing Thakur, we understand what is right and wrong. Now we are at least saved from accepting anything and everything as religion, be it from our own wretched doubting minds within or from charlatans without. Both sides. Doubting mind does not accept even if it is right. And charlatans are there to cheat us. Knowing now that devotion, faith, etc. can be directly imparted to one like ordinary things, we have hope instilled in our hearts and we are confident of attaining immortality, being blessed with a drop of the grace of the Master who is an ocean of grace. So I received grace from Thakur. We are moving on to chapter 6. And there Gopal must come. Chapter 6, Sri Ramakrishna in the company of devotees. That heading continues. The story of Gopala's mother, first part, Purvakatha. Before she came to Thakur, what had happened? Before she will come now to meet Thakur. Up to that point, what had happened, that he will tell. So, first part he says, in Bengali it is Purvakatha. Up to that point, what had happened in her life. And that is Sarjan Swamiji's method. He is describing now when she came to Balram Babu's house on the return chariot. But how she behaved, all that. So it will depend upon her whole life story. That he is telling. And he has introduced 3 shlokas there. 2.5. Navina Nirada Shamam Neelendivara Vallavi Nandanam Vande Krishnam Gopala Rupinam. You understand? Krishna's description. Navina Nirada Shamam. When the cloud is newly formed, then dark in color it is. Bluish dark. Shamam, that is Sham. Neelendivara Lochanam. Indivara lotus. Neel, blue lotus. Like that is eyes. Krishna. Vallavi Nandanam. Vallavi means Gopikas. Nandanam means giving happiness to. Matter of joy for. Vallavi Nandanam. One day, Krishnam Gopala Rupanam. Krishna himself is Gopal at that time. Cow, what is called? Tending to cows. Sfurat Bharada Alodbadda Neela Kunjita Murdajam Vallavi Vadanam Boja Madhupana Madhuvrata. This is from Shri Gopal Stotra. Blue curly hair tied up on the head along with the glittering feathers of a peacock tail. I worship the bee drinking the honey of the lotus of the milkmaid's face. Understand this? Krishna kissing the gopis. Yo yo yam yam tanum mattam bhakta Shraddhayarchitum michchati tasya chalam shraddham tameva vidadamyam. In Gita, Bhagavan says, if somebody is faith in some form of God, I make that one faith form, so that he will proceed. One more quotation from Matthew's, from Gospel of, that is Bible, New Gospel. And whoso shall receive one such little child in my name, receiveth me. That means he should worship a child as God. The Christians do not believe this, but Saradananda Swami has shown. And Swami Vivekananda has preached this, that those religions who believe in incarnation, they can easily become mothers and fathers of God. Now, before we start, on the heading itself, there is a footnote, story of Gopala's mother. And that is, because the things will appear so strange, that we should not feel that he has cooked up. We are here going to present the reader the wonderful story of the spiritual visions and experiences of Gopala's mother, a devotee of Sri Ramakrishna, by way of an example of how the master established in the divine mood was seen by us to enact his divine play. We are seeing how he is enacting his divine play with devotees. Divine play with particular sadhakas and devotees. Some may scent exaggeration in this story. To them we say, we have not added any touches whatever to it, not even in its language. We have placed it before the reader almost in the form in which we corrected it. Almost means this grammatical correction like that he has done. Part of it from women devotees of the master, Yogidma. Again, we have collected them from persons who in everything they say keep a keen eye on truth and feel repentance if they lapse from it. This is all related to Yogini. She always speaks true. If some slip happens, she will feel very bad. And they are persons who, far from being flatterers of the Brahmanya of Kamarati, have sometimes strongly criticized to us some of our actions. So they are neither flatterers nor speaking untruth, and we are talking about them. And name of that previously before Gopal's mother was Kamaratir Brahmani. She came from a place called Kamarat. So we now enter the description. We cannot accurately say when Gopala's mother met the master for the first time, but almost accurately sharing us. But it is certain that when we saw her first with the master at Dakshineshwar in the month of March or April in 1885, she had been visiting the master for about 6 months. And the extraordinary sport to the divine Lord as Gopal, that is the covered boy of Vrindavan, had also been going on with her. So already that has happened when first they saw him. So 6 months back you go from March or April 1885. On that occasion, Gopala's mother, we remember distinctly, sat facing southeast, that is facing the master, near the large jar containing the water of the Ganga, in the northwest corner of the master's room. Though she was about 60 years old, one could not guess it, for in the face of the old lady there shone the joy and happiness of a girl. All these physical things are gone. When we were introduced to her, she said, "Are you Ji's son?" Saradananda Swamiji's father's name was also Girish Parat. "You are ours indeed. Ji's son has become a devotee. This time Gopala will not make a single exception. He will attract all one by one." That's very good. I had previously been related to you in a worldly sense. Now I am related in another, closer manner and so on. So some distant blood relation was there, that now as devotee of Thakur I have closer relation. Gopala's mother saw the master for the first time. Now we are going back. It was the month of December of 1884. So yes, calculated there. The sky was as clear as possible in December. Again, there was, we remember, a little touch of cold, quite crisp, from the beginning of the month of November that year. It changes every year. It was perhaps in that season of Hemanta, neither very hot nor very cold, that Gopala's mother had the blessing of meeting the master for the first time. Hemanta, winter is calculated as 6 months. Sharad, Hemanta and Shishir. Sharad is immediately after rain, sky becomes clear and all that. And Hemanta means when the dew falls down. That is the Hemanta. In the night, that dew falls. That season is Hemanta. And then Shishir is called fog by the Westerners when the leaves fall. So these 6 months in between the. So not very cold, not very hot. Neither very hot nor very cold, that Gopala's mother had the blessing of meeting the master for the first time. Now 6 months, he said, April, it becomes 4 months or 5 months. So all this should be taken approximately. He has already said accurately or not. But he has pointed out. No, it was perhaps in the month of November that year. Cold from the beginning of November. They came by boat to see the master from the temple garden on the bank of the Ganga at Kamarhati, belonging to Govinda Chandra Datta of Pataldanga. That garden belonging to Govinda Chandra Datta, Pataldanga, another place in Calcutta. And they, he said, we said they, because Gopala's mother did not come alone on that occasion. The widow of the said owner of the garden and a distant relation of hers named Kamini came with Gopala's mother. So three ladies had come. The name of Sri Ramakrishna was then known to many in Calcutta. So they also were eager to see that extraordinary devotee. Ever since they had heard of him. That was how Thakur was known. The special service of the holy image had to be performed in the month of Kartik, November. Therefore, Govinda Babu's wife, the mistress of the house as she was called, Ginni Thakur, lived at Kamarhati this time every year. So that she observed, looks after that puja, and her house was Pataldanga. And looked after the said service personally. Again, Dakshineshwar was only 2 or 3 miles from Kamarhati. So it was very convenient to come from there to Dakshineshwar. The mistress of Kamarhati and Gopala's mother took that opportunity and came to the Kali temple of Rani Rasmani at Dakshineshwar with one more woman. That day the master respectfully made them sit in his own room and gave them such instruction about devotion, sang devotional songs for them, and bade goodbye to them, asking them to come again. While they were taking leave, the mistress invited the master to grace her temple at Kamarhati. The master also agreed to go someday at his convenience. He highly praised the mistress and Gopala's mother, so he does not mention the third lady. That day, he said, how beautiful is the expression of their faces and eyes. They are, as it were, floating on the current of the love of God. Their eyes are full of the intense love of God. Even the tilaka on the nose is beautiful. Vaishnava generally put that tilaka on the nose. And that is beautiful, means that is also expressing devotion. That is to say, the feeling of devotion within was, as it were, bubbling out through their dress, deportment, etc., and there was no attempt at display. They are not showing who are Vaishnava, but they are dressing and their devotion was showing. Govinda Chandra Datta of Pataldanga. Now he is introducing. Govinda Chandra Datta of Pataldanga was a broker to a famous European house in Calcutta. Broker, you understand, no? Dealing with other businessmen. He became very rich on account of his efficiency and perseverance. But owing to an attack of paralysis, he became unfit for service. Prior to this, his only son had died, and he followed the son. Among those who survived him were his two daughters. Peculiar name you'll find them, Bhuto and Nara. Daughters. Footnote, the names are given, Yageshwari and Narayani. So in Bengali, that is the method. And their children. But as he had considerable property, the latter part of his life had been spent in religious discussions and virtuous activities. Virtuous acts such as arrangements for discourses on the Ramayana and the Mahabharata in his house, installation of the holy images of Radha and Krishna with great pomp in the Kamarhati garden, recital of the whole of Bhagavata and other Shastras, a ceremonial gift of valuables of the weight of himself and his wife to the Quran. You know this method? Tulabhar? Generally, when they reach the age of 60 or 80 or 90, they do this. The husband and wife will sit in one pan and the other, they will put gold, equal weight, and then they will distribute. Here it does not say gold, valuables. The poor and others. Brahmins, poor and others. That is distributed. Had all been performed by him before he passed away. Besides, there was no lack of festivals, or as they would call it, no cessation of 13 festivals in 12 months. That means more than once a month. In connection with the worship of Radha Krishna in the Kamarati garden, and prasad was distributed unstintedly to guests and others, the poor and the indigent, to everybody. His wife, a devotee. After the death of Govinda Babu, his virtuous wife also conducted for a long time the service of the holy images with the same sort of pomp. Afterward, the greater part of the property was lost for various reasons. Therefore, in order that there might not be any falling off in the service of the holy images, Govinda Babu's wife herself lived there and engaged herself in looking after it. The mistress belonged to the old school of thought and life and underwent much grief and suffering in her life. So her very bones, as it were, felt that there was peace in the practice of religion. Majjagato old style people. But the cursed worldly entanglement was not to be easily shaken off. She had to take care of her daughters, sons-in-law, society, position, honor, etc. Because she is from a great family. But she observed with the strictest rigidity the vow of brahmacharya from the day her husband died. Here, brahmacharya does not only mean free of sex. This hardship and all that is included. She used to sleep on the floor. In the society, she is all right with the society. But in private life, she is like this. She used to sleep on the floor, bathe at the three junctures of the day. Trisandhya Snan. Early morning, midday, and early evening. Take food once only in 24 hours. This is the brahmacharya. And she spent her time in practicing the vows of gifts, fast, japa, meditation, and other religious observances. Dan, vrata, japa, dhyan, and other religious observances. And above all, in the service of the holy images. The family of her priest, Agormani, a child widow. Through that, Brahmani, we are coming to Gopalan. The family of Govinda Babu's priest lived very near the Kamarati temple. Govinda Chandra Datta, you understand? They are not Brahmins. So the priests are always Brahmins. Leela Madhav Bandhopadhyay, the priest, was a respectable person. Gopala's mother, previously named Agormani Devi, was his sister. As she had become a widow in her childhood, she had been a member of her father's family all her life. Now the Western style people, we may not understand. They were married very young and sometimes become widow at that young age. Then they came back and lived with the other's family. Agormani began to spend her time in the service of the images in the temple. Ever since she became very intimate with Govinda Babu's wife, the mistress as she was called. As her love for God increased, she had a strong desire to live in the temple itself on the Ganga. So she took the permission of the mistress and began to live in one of the rooms in the woman's apartment. She visited her father's family once or twice a day, that was all. Agormani loved to practice strict penance and brahmacharya like the mistress. There was therefore much similarity of thoughts and feeling between them. The mistress, a rich lady possessing much property, had outwardly to take notice of her honor, social position, etc. But as Agormani had none of them, she was comparatively free. Again, as there was not a single child born to her, there was nothing to bother her. What she possessed was perhaps a sum of 600 or 700 rupees in those days. It will come to some lakhs now. The sale proceeds of her ornaments, that's all, etc. That also was deposited with the mistress in government security papers. That was the style in those. Agormani used to live on the interest of this money, and when in great want, she drew from the capital a little. Of course, the mistress also helped her and her brother in all matters. So, tomorrow we'll start the actual story. Where sufficient background has been given. Om Sarvadharmasthapakastam Sarvadharmaswarupakah Acharyanam Acharyo Ramakrishnaya Te Namaha. Om Shanti Shanti Shanti. Hare Om Tat Sat. Sri Ramakrishna Arpanam.